bueno, hay una gobernanza en el territorio que les estarían muy felices de que se contactaran con ellos a efectos de llevar a cabo estas iniciativas. Esto no avanza. Creo que se acabó la pila. Sí. Bueno. Sí, queda una más. Gracias, Cristian. Del computador. Bueno. Mientras solucione este problema voy a seguir avanzando. Además que nos quedamos aquí, teníamos una excelente imagen. Y como comentario o reflexión final, en definitiva, ¿cómo podríamos decir que la Mesa Multiactor ayuda a la sostenibilidad hídrica de la cuenca del Salar Atacama? Sí, con estas iniciativas, pero además de aquello, no, la siguiente. Acá estamos, lo que les estaba comentando. Más allá de realizar estas iniciativas en concreto, hay dos aspectos que metodológicamente podemos destacar. Uno dice relación con que las iniciativas que se generan, dado que se discuten entre los distintos sectores, resultan ser iniciativas, por supuesto, colaborativas, pero también innovadoras. O sea, no son las iniciativas que quizás nosotros como Secretaría Técnica, con nuestros respectivos backgrounds académicos, propondríamos, sino que son iniciativas bien particulares desarrolladas por los actores del territorio, y eso a su vez hace que estas iniciativas sean mucho más eficientes, porque responde directamente al dolor o la preocupación de quienes están en el territorio. Y de la mano de aquello, ayuda a generar un compromiso respecto a la participación de este tipo de iniciativas, porque no es fácil, en el fondo, asistir o hacerse tiempo para estar todos los meses en esta reunión, pero dado que ven resultados, que ven que las iniciativas recogen sus ideas, que responden a sus inquietudes, eso ha generado este afectamiento con los actores de la mesa. Esa es... Ya, bueno, no sigue avanzando, pero no importa. No funciona. Con esto ya cierro. Como les comenté, el objetivo de esta primera parte era mostrarles una mirada general de la mesa. Les puedo hablar de la gobernanza y de otras cosas más, pero eso creo que lo podemos comentar en el café. Y bueno, cierro esta parte de la presentación con algunas indicaciones administrativas, como por ejemplo, ya lo dije, los que necesitan traductor el aparato hasta el final. A la derecha encuentran agua. Tenemos 2 coffee break en la mañana y en la tarde, y bueno, para los primeros 50 inscritos tenemos un almuerzo reservado, así que los que están anotados ahí, al final, a la 1:30 por ahí les vamos a dar las indicaciones. Eso, muchas gracias por su interés en un tema tan importante como es el cuidado del agua en la cuenca del Salar Atacama. Bienvenidos. Muchas gracias.
Test. I just have to test the pointer here. Okay. Seems to be okay.
¿Aló?
Hello, everyone. So glad to be here. I wish that I could do this in Spanish, but I can't. So I'm just going to go to English. I'm Brendan Moran. I'm a postdoc researcher at the University of Massachusetts. I've been working on these hydrogeological and climatological questions in Salar, Atacama for like 8 years almost now with our whole team. So yeah, thank you for inviting us, and so glad to be here. So excited to share this. This first part, I'm going to talk a little bit about the observed climatical changes that we've seen in the basin, and then also the environmental or hydrological changes that we've seen at the surface. Some acknowledgements first, of course. Our whole team, we have a large team of researchers that really this would not be possible without. Some of them are here: Nicole, Dave, Xander. Some of them aren't here. Leanne, Jordan, Dan, a lot of other people, Sarah McKnight. So the University of Massachusetts, the University of Alaska. We have a little logo for our research group, Lithium Solutions. I'm sure you've seen it maybe around. All of our sponsors and partners, Albemarle, BMW, BASF, GIZ. Thank you to you all. So a little overview. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of the system, just some background on the system and how we think it functions. And then I'll go into the observations that we've made of the climate, of the hydrology, of the environmental changes. So this is the basin, the watershed of the Salar de Atacama. This is the nucleus, this dark gray, just for context, and really all the important hydrological features, the mines, the rivers, the towns. So this is a conceptual transect through the transition zone, we call it. So from the inflows, from the recharge, from the fresh water, through the transitional zones where the fresh water mixes and becomes brine eventually. So the precipitation recharge up gradient in the mountains, really most of the inflow comes from this area. Most of the water that makes it through the basin comes from the high elevation and the mountains. It flows down gradient towards the Salar, towards the floor. You can see here that we call the inflow, the fresh inflow, the transitional zone, where obviously the really important features are the wetlands, the lagunas, the flamingos, and also one other key, really important piece that is maybe somewhat overlooked is something we call groundwater storage, and it's really the water that exists in the basin. That's groundwater, but it's not a lot of it's not recent ground, a lot of it's really old. And it's constantly flowing, down gradient towards the floor. Sometimes it takes a long time to change to get there to the basic floor. And there's another conceptual transect. We like to have these diagrams here. This has some geology in it, and one key, the sources of the water are really important. The source of the wetland water that feeds the wetlands. It's really important to know where it's coming from and how it moves through the system. So we have recent precipitation falling on the margin here. We use I'm not going to go into detail on this tritium piece, but we use an isotope of hydrogen that exists in the water molecule that helps us track really the age of the water. So as you can see here, something we call percent modern. Almost all of the inflow water is really just old water. It's really ancient water. And as we get down, talking a little faster, I gotta slow down. So you can see the distribution of this modern water in the marginal zones. We have a lot more of this modern water in the wetlands. As much as 30 or 40% of the lagunas and the open pools, as we call them, are actually recent rainwater. So this modern precipitation interacts with these wetlands a lot more readily than the ancient water. And then if we go to the brine, in the brine itself, there is some recent water, but we think overall most of the brine is old water. So the takeaway here, so relic water, we call this water relic water or old water. It's really most of the water in the basin is this relic water. It's really old. But at the same time, this recent water, so water that's weeks to months to years old, is really important in specific regions. So especially the wetlands, really the water that we see at the surface at the margin is really influenced by this recent rainwater. Really starkly different than the springs, the streams, the upland water, the fresh groundwater that we pump. So it's a really important point. So just some background on the climate variability. It's really important to see sort of the big picture of this. The climate in this area, we know that it was a lot wetter in the past and during the last glacial period. And maybe some people, why do we care? But the fact that the water is so old, we think thousands of years old potentially, this actually can matter in terms of what we're seeing at the surface, what we're seeing on the Salar. So it has been wetter in the past, we know this. And sort of the prevailing wisdom with climate change is that wet areas become wetter and dry areas become drier. But in this case, and also some recent work may be changing this a little bit, where we see that especially large precipitation events have become more frequent, more extreme. At the same time, drought severity has become more pronounced. So we get longer droughts, perhaps more deeper droughts. At the same time, we get large precipitation events. It's really important, observation that's being made in terms of climate change. And as we know, I'm sure, all the Chileans in the room know, the mega drought, as it's called, it's still probably ongoing in some ways, but there was a really major drought period region-wide, and we can see it in the Salar de Atacama, I believe. So it's really important to note. And so yes, so the modern climate in the basin, this is basin-wide. So this isn't specific regions. This is across the entire basin. So let's say since the mid '80s, we have a lot more satellite product records starting in the '80s. So we can actually measure the temperature in the basin since that time. And as you can see here, it's just increasing. Probably about 1 degree C or so since the mid-'80s, which is quite a bit. And it's consistent with the climate change models predictions. So if we look at the precipitation, this is the station data from the basin, all of the stations in all the high quality stations in the basin. And a couple key features here. You can see there are really 2 drought periods. This one, the most recent one, which is really associated with the mega drought, was a really pronounced dry period. There's a lot of stations that actually recorded no precipitation for many years in a row. And so this period, this almost 10-year period, really had a big influence on the wetland systems and the basin overall, the wetland, the basin hydrology. And then another feature, since that period, it's really become quite variable, you could say. Really, really large events. So this is annual, as you can see here. This is annual totals, but it's a good way to see sort of the overall picture. You can see that these really wet years and then really dry years back to back. And this is another important feature. I think that has to be, thought of when we talk about the wetlands and the lagoons and the changes that we observe, and also the groundwater. And then another important observation from the only really stream flow record in the basin in Rio San Pedro in the north. This is monthly data since the mid-'80s. It actually stopped in 2015, which is unfortunate, but it's this trend here. This is a statistically significant Mann-Kendall trend through the monthly record, and it shows about a 20% decrease through that time. Really consistent decrease. That's important. That is the inflow water, and it probably represents the inflow water across the whole basin, not just this one place. And it's important to know this is above the mines. This is far from the mines. The source region is way in the north in this case. So it's really a natural signal. 5 minutes. I'm sorry. Got a little, yeah, okay. I'm going to go a little quickly through a few of these slides. This is our methodology. By the way, just please answer questions. I'll be happy to answer questions about any of this. I'm going to walk through this a little bit faster than I anticipated. We use satellites to help us assess the hydrology here. Surface water extent is one thing we use a lot. Vegetation extent. We use the Landsat satellites to measure this, and we can plot time series, bi-weekly time series. This data, this surface water data, which is really important observation. It's actually available online. You can actually go and look at the things that we're plotting here. So, and another piece is the GRACE satellite, which measures the total storage of water on the land surface. It's really an important measurement that we can make as well. And all this is in this recent paper that we published. So this is a time series of the surface water extent, as I mentioned, the vegetation extent. So these are total across the basin. You can see that since the drought period, so this period in here, there was a wet event in here, but this period, it's actually increased the total extent in surface water in the basin and also vegetation. We think this is due to the large rain events that have occurred that actually have influenced the hydrology on the basin floor. So that's an important piece. We have the stream flow again, and then this is the GRACE, as I talked about. So the total storage of water within the basin outline, and this has dramatically increased as well since the drought. It's really it takes the entire basin and just and measure it. It's a little bit crude, but it's actually a good way to see. If we're mining all of this water, why is the total increasing? It's a really interesting observation. And then at the same time, the pumping has increased through this period. So we're taking a lot of water out, but there's a lot of water still entering the system. Yes, so climate is really important. This is a just a summary really of what I've just discussed. We took all of these metrics that we can measure and we plotted them against time and with the pumping initiations of of SQM, of Albemarle, of the copper mines. And you can see the changes over time. So the brine levels have decreased. A lot of the freshwater aquifers have decreased. At the same time, the vegetation, was flat or more or less, and now has increased lately. On the plateau, the black, the basin floor surface water in purple, they move in concert but are slightly different. And then the grays down here. So yeah, I'm gonna walk through this quickly. This is so we use a precipitation product, we call it. It's a satellite-based way to assess rainfall, and we compared it to other products that are used. There's many of these. The product that we use is the most reliable, I think. It's an important thing to, there's a lot of details here, but I'd be happy to discuss any, where those estimates came from. It's actually paired with the station data, so it's not the station data, but it's another way to look at rainfall. 1 minute. Okay. Yeah, I want to touch on this quickly. So these are some papers that have come out. And I don't want to use this strong language, but in this case, I really have to, just because. So Liu et al. 2019 and Liu et al. 2020. This is an assessment of NDVI, so that metric that I discussed here, where the method for using this is completely irresponsible. This red here is water. So we're talking about vegetation. They include water in the vegetation, which is, the results and the conclusions are essentially invalid. You can't plot, talking about vegetation while plotting water extent. You can see the evaporation ponds here are included in this data. And then at the same time, another paper came out from this group that looked at the GRACE satellite, which I talked about, and they use the residual of the model to plot. So you can see this green is the GRACE that I plotted, which is the raw data. They plot a land surface model residual, and they get the opposite trend, which is irresponsible. That's not that you don't plot residuals of models, and also they don't describe the domain over which this model was assessed in their paper, or what this is actually assessing. What are these data points from? It appears like it's the entire western part of the Atacama Desert, including the Salar Atacama. Yeah. So okay, that's fine. These works are going to be discussed later. I apologize that took a little longer than I thought. Yeah. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Muchas gracias, Brendan, por la presentación. Vamos a dar un espacio para 10 minutos de pregunta. ¿Alguien tiene una aquí?
Thank you, Brendan. Appreciate it. Yeah, I'd like to know, according to your studies, if there is any correlation between the relic water and the quality of the brine that we're seeing in that specific region of Atacama, and also if you consider that the drought that the area has been experimenting for a long period of time has anything to do with the production of lithium on the mining companies. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So the first point, yeah, I'm actually going to discuss more about the relic water idea in the third block. So maybe I'll touch on that then, just because I didn't describe the methods, but yeah, I think there is some relation. In terms of the drought, yeah, I just I think it would take really strong evidence to say anything about the mining affecting climatology patterns. It's just the mega drought that occurred is a Pacific-wide massive scale drought that really, it was region-wide, and we actually can see it in the Puno Plateau as well, the same signal. I just don't think that there's any evidence of that. I think it's a large-scale thing. The same thing with the climate. We can see it's increasing. That's global climate change. Yeah. Oh, well, yeah. I mean, anthropogenic climate change. Yeah, for sure. I mean, 2015, there's a global change in the sea surface temperatures that probably increased those really large events that we see, and also the severity of the drought. I think it's one and the same. Maybe a drought would have occurred, but it wouldn't have been as pronounced, or maybe those large events wouldn't have been as large. I think that's probably how we can see it. Yeah.
Gracias, Brenda. ¿Alguien tiene otra pregunta? ¿Su nombre, José?
José Yáñez. Thank you, Brendan, for your presentation. Considering that all these changes with nature changing and conditioning the whole behavior of rivers, groundwater levels, and everything else, my question for you is, what do you think it's a way for the companies to face the environmental compliance they have, considering that there is an anthropogenic effects working on, and besides the natural process? Yeah, it's quite complicated.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good question. That's the big question that we have. I think I had a slide at the end that summarized that exactly. That disentangling the climatic signals with the anthropogenic pumping extraction signals is quite difficult, of course. Our paper discusses that paper I put up, the Earth's Future paper from 2022. The title suggests that too. It's the pumping initiated right when the Landsat records started too. So we don't have a baseline. And then we have, two competing things for the, we have the drought, which probably increases evaporation, and also just temperature increasing evaporation in the wetlands. We have decreasing freshwater levels in the Monterey aquifer. We have the brine level decreasing. And disentangling those is very difficult. I think part of what we tried to do with this paper is to show that it's not just extraction. There's a really powerful climate signal that needs to be incorporated as well. We need to work on disentangling that more. I don't think we can do that quite yet.
Yeah. The issue is quite urgent because the companies, which are currently very important for Chile in terms of taxes, they pay to finance a whole world of needs, and the companies are obliged to comply with all those water levels threshold and pumping rates below some. So they should continue to be reporting on this issue. Is a long-term process, which is all behind, superimposed with its.
Yeah.
I think it's something that this Mesa Multiactor should have in mind, to help to the companies, to the authorities, to have a deep dialogue on the whole issue.
And I think just quickly, a couple of things that Nicole. So we need to better constrain the evaporation changes, I think, because the shallow water in the wetlands is really, the evaporation is really, really important. I don't think we know exactly, how that's changed or how it could increase in the future, and the effect that it has on the soil moisture, on the shallow groundwater. The older groundwater, the groundwater in the Monterey really has almost no connection to climate. And so those water levels they're really kind of two different pieces, but we need to monitor them, of course. We need to try to better constrain the connections in the subsurface. Yeah.
Bueno, cerramos con 3 preguntas. Ya, tú la primera.
From the University of Chile. You mentioned that there is also a change in the intensity of precipitation events, but you only show the average. See, you mentioned that there is a change in the intensity of precipitation, but you only show annual average. Do you think that the change in the way we get water in the system may have an impact on the surface water? Because when you have a very intensive precipitation, you have more runoff and less infiltration, so the system will respond in a short time. But if you have some infiltration, it may attenuate the effect.
Yeah, really good question. Yeah, that's something we talk about, a lot. I think so. So one thing to note is the annual. It only rains 1 or 2 months a year, so the annual total is really a good. It rains in January and February. So if I did a monthly, it would look similar. But yeah, the intensity has increased, and that changes the recharge rates. It changes the response. I think one interesting thing is that GRACE, the total terrestrial water storage, those large jumps are probably due to preferential recharge occurring in the uplands, where when you get bigger rain events, you actually get more recharge in a lot of cases, where it's able to saturate the soil and then infiltrate more rapidly, and also probably more runoff, especially in the wetlands. We probably get more runoff. So those two things are probably occurring at the same time. And the impact, you can actually see here with the transitional pools far out towards the nucleus, those are dramatically grown after those events, which is nowhere in the record before that. So that's runoff. Yeah, and the effect, I think it's influenced the vegetation. I think it's influenced the surface water extent, and also just the total storage of water in the uplands. Yeah, and it's probably going to continue, which is an important thing too.
Necesito hacer la pregunta en español. ¿Ahí sí? Okay. Sí, es respecto a las edades del agua. Me quedó la duda respecto a que, ¿no es cierto?, tenemos el sistema que precipita en montaña y luego recarga hasta al llegar al núcleo. Sin embargo, las edades mostraron un porcentaje opuesto. Las aguas dulces son más viejas y las aguas que aparecen en el núcleo, incluso de abajo, tenían 10%, o sea, eran más antiguas. ¿Se podía un poco explicar ese comportamiento inverso?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah, those are, yeah. So another point that I will, in the third block, I will talk more about the whole water age tracer, which we can talk more about. But just quickly, yeah. I think that block I showed, the 10% is really shallow nucleus water. So we don't have a lot of deep samples of tritium in the nucleus. We think that, so you can even see here again, the transitional pool water goes over the surface, dissolves the halite, and gets preferentially into the nucleus at the shallow level. And that's why we see a sort of higher signal. It's not water that's coming from high and moving underneath, it's just over the surface. That's how it happens. That, any deep water we measure is old. There's just no tritium anymore. We have hundreds of samples, so over 10 years, and it's just the same. No tritium. So yeah, I think it's really a surface process.
to get into the nucleus.
Gracias. Bueno, ahora damos el paso a la segunda presentación. Nuestra segunda presentación tiene por tema simulaciones del impacto relativo de la extracción de agua dulce y salmuera en el Salar de Atacama, con la señorita Nicole.
Muchas gracias.
Hola.
Bueno, mientras tanto me presento, me llamo Nicole Blin, yo soy de Chile. Hace poco, bueno, yo en verdad como más de 6 meses en UMass trabajando con David, Brendan, Samuel, y yo hice mi doctorado acá en Chile, en la Católica, en modelación de agua subterránea y cambio climático. Y en verdad lo que les voy a presentar ahora no es un trabajo que hice yo, es un trabajo que hizo Dan Corcoran, que es un alumno de doctorado de David. Es un trabajo súper interesante. Y la razón de por qué yo lo estoy presentando es porque sé de modelación y lo que yo creo que en verdad la razón más importante es porque hablo español. Así que lo que me hace perfecta para estar aquí presentándoles el trabajo y muy interesante de Dan. Lo he estudiado harto en el último tiempo para poder presentárselos a ustedes y he encontrado que es súper interesante y espero poder transmitirles eso que a mí me pasó con este trabajo. Entonces, la motivación para este estudio fue principalmente el crecimiento del interés de energías verdes y por eso entonces también el aumento de la demanda de litio. Y también muy importante que las zonas donde hay más litio es, por ejemplo, el Salar de Atacama y Salares en Argentina, que pasa que están muy cerca de zonas de gran valor ecológico. Entonces, en este caso, el estudio se basa en el Salar de Atacama y en el Salar del Hombre Muerto que está en Argentina. Ahí lo pueden ver los dos en el mapa, el Salar de Atacama, el Salar del Hombre Muerto. Y son sistemas parecidos, pero con sus diferencias. El Salar de Atacama es un salar considerado más maduro que el Hombre Muerto. O sea, en verdad el Hombre Muerto es más heterogéneo. Entonces hay diferentes zonas, es un sistema mucho más complejo. Y el Salar de Atacama, nosotros ya sabemos que es un sistema muy árido, extremadamente árido, versus que el Hombre Muerto en Argentina es árido semiárido. Ups, apreté muy fuerte. Ya. Otra diferencia es la tecnología que se usa en ambas zonas para extraer el litio. En el Salar de Atacama se usa la tecnología más clásica, digamos, que es la tecnología evaporativa, donde se extrae la salmuera y se espera cierto tiempo hasta que esta evapore y se obtiene el litio, versus que en el Salar del Hombre Muerto se está haciendo con extracción directa de litio. Entonces, aquí se reinyecta después la salmuera en el sistema. Entonces, bueno, y además de esto veamos por qué son importantes ecológicamente estos sistemas. En el caso del Salar de Atacama, Dan aquí le puso DST, el sector sur de Tumisa, que es una zona de descarga a los wetlands, y en esta zona hay una baja en el nivel por la extracción de litio y muy poca extracción de agua dulce por la técnica de minería del litio, versus que en el río Trapiche, que es en la parte de Argentina, casi no hay una baja por la extracción de salmuera, pero el sistema de DLE sí usa mucha agua fresca. Entonces, eso es algo fundamental y que mueve la pregunta de investigación, ¿cierto? Que es cómo estas distintas tecnologías impactan en los sistemas y principalmente por el valor ecológico que tienen. Entonces, el objetivo fue desarrollar sistemas, o sea, estos modelos son teóricos, ahí les voy a contar más por qué, modelos 2D con característicos de estos dos sistemas para ver qué pasa entonces con la extracción de salmuera, principalmente con la descarga de agua subterránea y cómo eso va a afectar a los wetlands. Perdón, hay palabras que de repente voy a decir en Spanglish porque siento que está todo el rato traduciendo. Entonces, veamos primero, igual Brendan ya explicó esto, pero un poco el modelo conceptual de esto es que existe una salmuera que es mucho más densa y un agua fresca que es menos densa, entonces está más arriba del sistema, y esto se va a mezclar en una zona de transición, lo que hace muy importante que este tipo de sistemas se modelen con densidad variable, con modelos de densidad variable. Y para entender bien, para que esto sea generalizable, digamos, y se entienda bien el impacto de estos resultados, lo que se hizo fue hacer end members, que esto creo que no lo voy a traducir porque no sabría bien cómo, que son representativos de diferentes grados de madurez de los sistemas. Entonces, bueno, ahí les voy a explicar con las secciones transversales que les voy a mostrar, pero en el fondo se hicieron sus modelos 2D. Entonces, el Salar de Atacama es esta zona de acá, y entonces que atraviesa el salar, el núcleo. Lo que es gris más clarito, no sé si se ve bien, son las zonas de transición, y aquí en verde están las zonas aportantes, y lo mismo aquí. Y tenemos el que está en el west, y aquí en el east, perdón, eso, como lo leo es más fácil decirlo así, perdón por ese spanglish. Entonces les voy a mostrar cómo se ven esas secciones. Entonces primero, el Salar de Atacama, tenemos una zona donde hay una transición mucho más gradual, que es propio de un salar maduro, entre las rocas que son carbonatadas, el yeso y la halita, es el ejemplo. Entonces, eso se caracteriza como un salar maduro. En el este del Salar del Hombre Muerto, sin embargo, vemos que aquí es mucho más heterogénea esa transición. Entonces, eso es a lo que se le conoce como salar inmaduro. Versus que en el oeste, de nuevo se ve algo más, una transición más gradual, lo que también se conoce como un salar maduro. Entonces, estos son diferentes, los end members entonces significa que representan diferentes salares, y con los que se puede entonces generalizar los resultados que les voy a mostrar ahora. O sea, que esa es la idea. Entonces, este modelo, como les contaba, es un modelo 2D, que lo hicieron, un modelo numérico en módulo de diferencias finitas, que aquí estoy segura que todos están familiarizados, al menos en esta casa, y es un modelo paramétrico, porque es un modelo teórico donde lo que importa en verdad es ver qué pasa con el sistema, cómo responde el sistema ante diferentes cambios en sus parámetros, más que hacer una proyección a futuro como algo determinístico. Y como les contaba, es súper importante que este modelo sea de densidad variable, entonces para eso se usó SeaWorld. Entonces aquí tenemos los tres modelos, las secciones de los modelos 2D, y las condiciones de borde son recarga, que está ahí a la izquierda está la recarga de agua fresca, que viene de las zonas más altas, y por el otro lado, como esto se hizo un corte, hay recargas de salmuera para representar ya sea el inflow de almacenamiento o de recarga que está llegando del otro lado, que tiene que pasar por la salmuera. Entonces, eso sería recarga, después la evaporación, que evapoconcentración, porque mientras se evapora va quedando más concentrado, y el paquete well de flow para representar las extracciones. Entonces se hicieron diferentes simulaciones con tres tipos diferentes de agua que se está extrayendo. Agua fresca, alita y transition, que es como una mezcla, agua salada, digamos, que no es todavía salmuera. Y también está el baseline, que todo esto entonces se va a comparar con esa línea base. Y se representaron las abstracciones como un porcentaje de la recarga de agua fresca. Entonces, y con eso lo que se vio era cómo cambiaba la descarga de agua dulce del sistema y la salinidad en la extracción. Ok, entonces veamos primero, fue muy rápido. Entonces este es el flujo, la dinámica, los resultados en términos de cómo es la descarga de agua dulce en el sistema. Entonces ahí vemos en la torta, en el diagrama de torta, que la mayoría acá es agua fresca en el Salar de Atacama. Así es, Salar de Atacama. Esto es la línea base. En comparación con eso, aquí tenemos estos dos, el este y el oeste, y en el este lo que llama súper harto la atención es la expansión de la zona de transición, o sea, el grosor que tiene y cómo eso también va a afectar en comparación con el oeste. Entonces, acá vemos que... Ahí está. En la zona este, la mayoría de la descarga es fresca, versus que en el oeste la mayoría es salmuera. Otros resultados es con respecto a la descarga, a la descarga de agua. Entonces aquí puse en distinto color para que se entienda qué es lo que se está mostrando. Entonces acá están los escenarios de agua, bombeo de agua fresca abajo, bombeo de agua salada y ya salmuera. Y cómo eso va cambiando con respecto a la línea base. Entonces, la línea base que es el negro, entonces se ve que el agua fresca es lo que más se ve afectado en los tres sistemas. Que al bombear agua fresca cambia mucho eso en comparación con la salmuera, con respecto a la línea base. Oh, ya. Entonces, ahí me voy a apurar y después por último las preguntas. Entonces, ya, eso era, que al bombear agua fresca el impacto en el sistema es mucho mayor en comparación con la línea base que al bombear salmuera o agua salada. Y acá se ven los resultados en función del flujo del almacenamiento por cambios de presión, que está en azul, y el cambio en la tasa del almacenamiento por flujos derivados ya del cambio de las concentraciones. O sea, uno es presión y otro es cambio en las concentraciones. Y aquí lo que se puede ver es que lo que está en rojo está haciendo un efecto amortiguador de lo que está pasando en el sistema, y veamos por qué. Por ejemplo, acá, al bombear agua dulce, que sería este primer escenario en los tres, al bombear agua dulce, ambos storage, ambos almacenamientos disminuyen. Pero al bombear salmuera, solamente está disminuyendo los efectos de la presión. ¿Por qué? Porque al sacar salmuera, está cambiando la concentración de la salmuera que está quedando, y al ser esa misma masa menos densa, va a aumentar el volumen, y eso hace un efecto buffer en lo que está pasando con respecto al sistema. Entonces, por eso cada vez que comparamos cuando hay una extracción de salmuera, vemos este efecto buffer, y que es mucho mayor cuando la zona de transición es mayor. Además de eso, se comparó qué era lo que estaba pasando en el sistema con respecto a los humedales, cómo varía la extensión de los humedales en el tiempo, y para eso se usaron el NDVI que Brendan ya explicó. Entonces, con respecto al Salar de Atacama, bueno, ahí se puede ver que el bombeo de la salmuera en el río Trapiche, que está en Argentina, ahí claramente provocó un cambio súper brusco en la extensión de los humedales al bombear agua fresca. No sé si dije salmuera, me refería a agua fresca. Versus que en el Salar de Atacama esto es mucho más estable y depende mucho más de las precipitaciones, los cambios de precipitación. Bueno, entonces, en resumen, importa el tipo de agua que se esté bombeando, y los efectos son mucho mayores en el sistema, los impactos son mucho más negativos cuando el bombeo es de agua dulce que cuando es de agua salada o salmuera. Eso es en resumen. Feliz de contestar sus preguntas.
Muchas gracias, Nicole. Nos queda tiempo para preguntas. Ahí está.
Hola. Hola, Nicole. Quería hacer una pregunta respecto a los perfiles de los tres perfiles que hicieron, uno en el Salar de Atacama y el otro en el Salar del Hombre Muerto. Que en el del Hombre Muerto había una zona de
Aquí, de los resultados.
Aquí, que tienen una zona de transición en el perfil del este mucho más ancho.
Sí.
Entonces quería preguntarte si esto es solamente un efecto de la modelación y no tienen información para calibrar que realmente así es la zona de transición en este perfil real, o si saben que es así, quedó bien calibrado, y si es el caso de que es así, que nos puede explicar un poco por qué tenemos una zona de transición más ancha? ¿Cuáles serían los factores que están que influyen en tener esto?
Gracias por la pregunta. Creo que en esto voy a ceder la palabra a David, porque él estuvo en toda esa parte de los estudios y creo que podría responder mucho mejor que yo. Así que, Dave, please.
Hi, everybody. I think I understood the question is about how wide the transition zone, and that's yeah. So no. This is consistent with the observations in the field, the geophysical data, the salinity measurements and observation wells. And if you go to the geology slide, go back a little bit. Go up. So one of the things that's very characteristic about the East Basin and in the Homer Muertos Salar is that the topography is very shallow, and it creates a very wide zone of kind of mixing between the freshwater and the brackish water. And that's it's really the reflection of the geology there and the topography, and that's why you get this big transition zone that happens there. And that particular area is the discharge zone of the Los Patos Delta, kind of an important brackish wetland complex there. So it creates this kind of wide transition zone, which then, as a result of that wide transition zone, it causes kind of a different response of brine and freshwater extraction. And I think the really important thing about the work that Nicole did a great job explaining is that these systems they respond differently and at different time scales when you're talking about freshwater extraction compared to brine. And so in the case of the Homer Muertos Salar, and Xander will talk about this in a little bit, but different evaporation or different lithium extraction technologies use different freshwater. So we have to be really careful about where those freshwater extractions are happening and understand what their impacts on the environment. So.
¿Otra pregunta para Nicole o para David? José.
Hola, hay algo que no estaba explícito, que eran las densidades que se utilizaron. Por ejemplo, de agua fresca todo el mundo puede entender que es de 1 gramo por centímetro cúbico o 1 tonelada por...
Creo que solo 1,2.
Ya, eso para la salmuera.
Sí.
Y eso en ambos salares, o sea, me consta que en el salar de Atacama es así, 1,2, 1,23, 24, no sé. Pero en el salar de Hombre Muerto es de ese mismo orden, la densidad.
Tengo entendido que sí.
Del mismo orden, 1,2 gramos por centímetro cúbico. Ya. ¿Y cómo afecta la topografía, la transición? Porque tú, Dave, tú comentaste que era una topografía bien plana, creo, o una shallow topography, dijiste. ¿Y cómo afecta eso? ¿Genera que la zona de mezcla sea más ancha? Porque los flujos de recarga tienen un gradiente hidráulico más pequeño. ¿O cómo, por favor, si puedes desarrollar un poco el efecto de la densidad de los miembros extremos, que ya son lo mismo en ambos salares, y el efecto de la topografía en la zona de descarga?
Can you go to the slide with the density salinity slide? Yeah, so we looked at 3 different pumping scenarios. One where we were just pumping fresh water, pumping, let's say, the brine that sits underneath the transition zone, and then pumping of brine in the more halite, dominated areas. And the sensitivity of the interface of those changes are different, right? So one of the things that we found in this parametric study was that there's more interface movement or change from freshwater extraction compared to the brine extraction. And part of that has to do with the geology, part of it has to do with the density differences between those two fluids. Now, one thing that's really also important to understand here is that in many salars, or at least let's say at Salar de Atacama and at Hombre Muerto, the amount of brine pumped typically is much greater than fresh water, just in terms of the magnitudes of those volumes. So you have to think about, when we're taking these results and then saying, okay, well, what does this mean for Salar de Atacama? We have to look at, models that, SQM or Albemarle or whoever, Corfo, use to look at what the kind of relative magnitudes of freshwater and brine extraction. So, it's going to change the salinity. And one of the important things that was found here is that the changes in the mass volume due to those changes in salinity offsets some of the pumping effects. That's why it creates these kind of counterintuitive results that sometimes we see. And I also say this paper right now is in review in the journal Science. So when it comes out, we'll make sure that it gets circulated to all of you.
Gracias, David. Ahí queda una pregunta y luego pasamos a un coffee.
Hola, mi nombre es Felipe Sandoval, soy de Roma. Hola, Nicole.
Hola.
Hoy me queda dando vuelta algo que mencionaste respecto a que el efecto de la extracción de salmuera sería menor, porque de alguna manera cambiaría la densidad de la salmuera y ocuparía más volumen.
Sí.
Mi duda es si hicieron alguna evaluación respecto a si era distinto extraer a una cierta profundidad, no sé, somera, o en profundidades mayores, porque me imagino que el efecto de la densidad también podría ser distinto dependiendo de a qué profundidad uno está sacando la salmuera.
Sí. Do you know the depth of which? Here?
Yeah. Yeah, I think for all of these scenarios, we kept the screens or the extraction at essentially near the water table or near the brine level or the fresh water, because both of these, if you go to the geology, so in the case of Salar de Atacama, and then if you can go to the Hombre Muerto, in Hombre Muerto, they pump brine on the east side of the basin below in a deeper confined aquifer. So, the propagation of those hydraulic head effects are going to be different because of the geology too, as opposed to Salar de Atacama, where a majority of the brine is pumped from the shallow halite aquifer. So yeah, where those wells are screened is critical.
Gracias.
Ya. Bueno, si no hay más preguntas, podemos pasar a un café, a descansar, a conversar y luego volvemos a las 12 con 2 presentaciones más. Gracias.
¿Cuánto tiempo? ¿Estás por cuánto tiempo? Estamos en lo mismo. Y a ver ahora lo de los... Cambiémoslo para adelante.
Y eventualmente yo lo hablo la posibilidad de apagar adelante.